Close your eyes and imagine this. A winter's night in 1661, Madrid, stifling under the heavy scent of incense and fresh blood. Beyond a thick oak door, a Spanish queen thrashes in the agony of childbirth. But when the cry everyone longs to hear never comes, the nobles waiting in the cold corridors catch the first whiff of something far worse: retribution. What they do not yet know is that the silent child lying limp inside, Charles II, will be far more than just a king. He will become a living curse, eating the throne from the inside out. And this ruin begins with the so-called sacred blood the Habsburgs swore to keep pure. To understand how a broken child could one day topple an empire, we must peel back each layer of velvet that wrapped him the moment he drew his first breath. Blood testament of a mad king, Charles, crowned but never learned to cry. Charles II was born under flickering candlelight, incense smoke mixing with the metallic tang of blood in the royal palace of Madrid. 1661, an aging empire held its breath, waiting for a newborn's cry. But this child only opened his mouth, tongue lolling, skin pale as wax, eyes blank and glassy like a cracked porcelain. They called him a gift from God, a pure-blooded Habsburg heir. But no one dared say what he truly was: a walking curse, the final offspring of a bloodline feeding on itself. They wrapped him in golden silk, laid a tiny crown beside his cradle, pretending that the jutting jaw was a sign of majesty. But in those first fragile years, Charles could barely nurse, could not walk. The courtiers, desperate to believe in something, told themselves, as long as the throne breathes, the empire stands. They turned away from the truth, from Joanna the Mad to Mariana of Austria. The Habsburgs had sealed their fate with generation after generation of cousin marriages and uncle-niece unions. The purer the blood, the more rotten the bones. Later, Charles sat slumped on his throne, drool trailing down his royal robes, while subjects knelt before him, praising him as a divinely chosen king. On his wedding night, the young queen trembled in terror while Charles gasped and whimpered like a child who never learned what to do. 2 wives withered beside him, each dying behind curtains heavy with silken prayers. The empire begged for a miracle, but no holy charm could revive a barren seed passed down through poison veins. Charles did not curse Spain. Charles was the curse. And when he died, the crown slid from a skull that had never fully formed. The empire crumbled with him, dissolving like clotted blood left to blacken in a silver jar beneath the crypt. Cursed bloodline. Don't let the velvet cloaks and gleaming crosses fool you. What flows through the veins of the Habsburgs was never sacred blood. It was a slow, inherited poison, brewed with every kiss between the same family. For more than 2 centuries, this dynasty built itself a prison of flesh and bone, the gates locked tight against outsiders, open only for cousins to wed cousins, nieces to marry uncles, children to call their uncle father and their aunt wife. They called it purity. In truth, it was a rope pulled tighter and tighter around the skulls of unfortunate heirs like Charles. Charles's ancestors, like Joanna the Mad, wandered palace halls, whispering to ghosts only they could hear. The infamous Habsburg jaw grew longer with each generation, jutting out like a blade, making it hard to eat or speak the truth. Court painters carefully softened these features on canvas, chiseling jaws, smoothing chins, so the kings might look majestic rather than monstrous. But behind the layers of oil paint hid bodies, trembling with seizures, barren wombs, minds unraveling in silent rooms. Mariana of Austria, Charles's mother, was both niece and wife to Philip the Fourth, two already entangled bloodlines coiling together like a snake devouring its own tail. The child they brought into the world was doomed before he ever drew breath, unable to grow strong, unable to sire new life. Yet, instead of breaking the cycle, the Habsburgs called it divine will. That is why Charles's blood testament is not buried only in his brittle bones. It runs backward through the centuries. Every cousin's kiss, every wedding night vow between kin, another drop of venom in the royal cup, and with every sip, the dynasty drove its own coffin nail deeper into the marble crypt. The child who did not belong to this world. From the moment he opened his eyes, Charles II did not look like any ordinary child, but more like a whisper from the grave, a rotting branch wrapped in royal silk. In the cold corridors of the Escorial Palace, people saw an infant with an oversized head, a jaw that jutted forward like a beast's snout, and a tongue so swollen he could not nurse. Wet nurses had to squeeze milk into silver spoons, drip by drip past toothless gums, just to keep him from starving. A living throne that whimpered, but never truly learned to cry like a child. Charles did not crawl when he should have, nor walk when boys his age ran through the marble halls. Years later, his first steps were weak and staggering, like a puppet corpse dressed in velvet, dragging royal hems across dirty stone floors. Yet the nobles bowed low, praising him as heaven's chosen one. They raised their goblets at feasts to toast his silent wisdom when they saw him sit for hours, blankly staring into flickering candlelight. Behind gilded doors, the truth leaked like a slow wound. Priests were called to banish demons. Midwives whispered tales of a child possessed, but no one dared speak the real horror aloud. Charles was not haunted by any devil. He was the ghost his dynasty had birthed, the walking shadow of every blood tie tied too tight. A child who did not belong to the realm of the living, yet was placed on a throne turning an entire palace into an open tomb where an empire quivered, forever afraid of a cry that would never come. A bride turned into a sacrifice. A rotting empire still demanded a wedding night. Charles II grew older, his mouth forever wet with drool, his mind drifting like ash in the wind. Yet the Spanish court clung desperately to the illusion that their sacred bloodline could be stretched one generation further. So they brought in Marie-Louise d'Orléans, a 17-year-old French princess with powdered skin and bright, innocent eyes, raised to believe that the Spanish crown was her destiny. But no one had taught her how to face a groom whose jaw jutted forward like a broken blade, whose tongue was too heavy to speak clearly, whose breath carried the sour scent of a bloodline gone bad. That wedding night, the courtiers shut the chamber doors like sealing a tomb. Whispers say. Charles only sat and watched his young bride weep, too bewildered to touch her, until servants were called in to explain what he was meant to do. But no lesson could revive what was already withered. No prayers could awaken the seed of a body long doomed to decay. Marie-Louise never conceived. The court burned incense, rubbed exotic potions on his skin, scattered holy relics around the bed, as if turning the royal sheets into an altar, all to force life into a line that was already dead. By 26, the queen was wasted away, her body hollowed out. Some said she died of illness, others of heartbreak and despair. Charles wept at her coffin like a child robbed of his favorite toy, begging to lie beside her cold body, waiting for her to wake again. It didn't take long for the court to push another bride into that same bed, Maria Anna of Neuburg, a German princess chosen for her family's reputation for healthy sons. But the Habsburg blood was already rotten to the root. Each queen was nothing more than an offering, giving up her body for a hope that had died long before she ever arrived. An empire rotting from the body of its king. By the time Charles II turned 30, his face looked like a portrait of his own death. His lower jaw sagged forward, teeth fell out one by one. Tufts of hair clung desperately to a scalp as soft as melted wax. His breath reeked of decay, a stench so strong that no cloud of incense could ever hide it. Outside the palace walls, Spain crumbled, crops failed, wars drained the coffers. People starved in silence. But inside the palace, they propped Charles up like a living statue. Each morning, attendants wrapped him in layers of gaudy velvet, gently combed what little hair remained, and set a heavy crown on a skull too soft to bear its weight. They never let him glimpse a mirror, as if they feared Charles might be horrified by his own reflection. In the echoing halls, ministers whispered to each other, "This empire survives on the breath of a man already halfway in the grave. Charles sat on his throne like a corpse that could blink. When he mumbled nonsense, the court would nod solemnly and call it holy wisdom. When he cried out for no reason, priests brought relics, splashed holy water onto his withering skin. All of it kept up the illusion that Spain still had a king, that the empire had not yet fallen apart. But beneath the layers of velvet and incense, the air reeked of truth, the sour blood of a lineage devouring itself, the stench of a crown clinging to a body that no longer belonged to the living. As long as Charles still drew breath, parasites found something to cling to. Yet the true price of this charade was clear: an entire kingdom being buried one slow day at a time in the stench of its own royal corpse. Death and the bells at night. When Charles II finally drew his last breath, the entire empire fell silent, as if a distant thunder had announced the end of the world. He was only 38, yet his body had decayed like a forgotten mummy. When they prepared him for burial, the royal physicians recoiled in horror. His heart was blackened like burned tar, his lungs swollen with fluid, his intestines rotting away, his blood thick as oil, his manhood shriveled and empty. A dynasty that once claimed its veins were chosen by God now oozed black blood from a body weighing barely 45 kilos. Spain had to listen to funeral bells toll for 3 days and 3 nights. Nobles draped themselves in black, bowing their heads, weeping on cue. Yet inside, each felt a quiet relief. Charles died, leaving no heir, no next king to carry the line. His death sealed the tomb of the Spanish Habsburgs, a royal house that had fed on its own blood until the last drop turned to poison. But that death brought no peace. Instead, it cracked open the gates of war. With the throne empty, its value was worth more than any legacy Charles had ever owned. The royal houses of France, Austria, and England descended like crows fighting over a corpse, tearing Spain apart piece by piece. An empire that once stretched proudly from Europe to the New World was now just a blood-soaked chessboard. The last bell fell silent, yet the stench of Charles lingered in the palace corridors. He was a king who never truly ruled, only existed as a living curse. And even now, his body, dissolved into the earth, whispers this truth: when power is treated like an heirloom of blood alone, a crown becomes nothing more than a velvet-lined coffin. A testament whispered in stone. As the morning bells finally faded beneath the domes of Escorial, under the cold stone floor lay the twisted bones of Charles II, curled up inside a gilded coffin, gold and silver. He was never truly sane enough to hold for himself. They called it a royal tomb, but for Charles, it was more like a stone cradle, because for 4 decades, He was never truly allowed to be a man. People like to remember kings by their victories, their grand statues, their wise final words. Charles left none of that. Only a blood-stained mirror for those who still believe crowns make them immortal. No triumphs, no children, no dynasty to continue. Just the whisper of genes coiling tighter and tighter like the roots of a dead tree, dripping poison through every generation. In the palace shadows, portraits of the Habsburg ancestors still hang, jaws heavy, chins broad, eyes dull like wax masks. Each face reminds us, you wish to keep power sealed inside your veins? Behold, blood, too, can turn to poison. After Charles II, the Spanish throne became a battlefield for royal vultures. That shriveled corpse had nothing left to lose, but its rotting legacy was enough to set Europe ablaze in a war for the empty crown. And now, if you still dare to stare into the cracked mirror Charles left behind, ask yourself, is a blood-born crown truly glory, or just a stone vault where a dynasty buries its own flesh alive? The royal bones still whisper in the darkness, and we will pry open many more rotten coffins yet. If you're not afraid to hear the secrets that fester behind velvet crowns, then drop a like, subscribe, ring the bell, and bow your head while you wait for the next tomb we'll unseal.